Welcome back. This is the podcast, It's Not Easy Being Green, Episode 2, Part 2. How did New York become a state of mandates and have unrealistic climate goals? I'm your host, Dominique, and we have our subject matter expert researcher, Christine, and behind the cameras, we have our producer and director, Eddie. In Part 1 of Episode 2, we spoke in detail about specific legislation that would ultimately act as a power grab that would move to eliminate local decision-making. However, we do want to bring to light one bill that repeals major renewable energy development programs, Bill S-2633, which is sponsored by Senator Joseph Griffo and co-sponsored by Senator Peter Oberracker. Essentially, this bill would amend the environmental conservation law and repeal 94C. That's what we discussed in Episode 2, Part 1. Christine, would you like to elaborate a little bit more about what exactly, if this bill is passed, how it would affect current legislation?
It would repeal the Office of Renewable Energy, so they would no longer be in charge of citing wind, solar, and renewable energy, and return the citing of renewable energy system to the Article 10 process that existed more than a decade ago.
So would you say the Office of Renewable Energy citing takes away local decision-making and transfers that power to Albany, which is a state-based administration? And how could people that do not reside in a specific small town make decisions for those people and not give them any voice in that process?
Yes, what ends up happening is that ORAS is an extension of the state's green energy agenda and will approve projects over community objection. So when the bill was passed, Senator Parker and Harkman promised that there would be community input. But the reality is that ORAS hears community arguments and then grants the renewable energy company a permit.
So they want to appease the public, and then they just grant the permit anyways. So now I think we should take a look at some of the mandates passed by this progressive Democratic majority and discuss what will this mean for taxpayers in everyday life. Specifically, it has come to my attention as a mother of 3 children, the mandate for electric buses to transport school children. By 2027, the state has mandated that all new school buses sold will be zero emission, and that by 2035, the state will have converted their entire school bus fleet to electric school buses. The state claims that this move away from diesel will reduce tailpipe emissions, lessening rates of asthma in children. I do want to point out, though, some misconceptions about this. So the approximate cost of a new school bus is about $150,000, whereas the electric school bus would cost about $400,000. So who's going to be held accountable for this significant increase in the cost for these new buses? Okay, let me guess, the taxpayer, right? So this mandate, the local citizens, they'll have no say, but they'll be footing the bill. Okay, so wow.
It would be enormously expensive, as you said. Electric buses cost up to 3 times as much as conventional diesel buses. Additionally, schools will be required to undertake significant electrical infrastructure and distribution line upgrades, as well as address the major workforce transition, because driving one of these is different from driving a diesel bus. They're much heavier. The cost of the conversion has been conservatively estimated at between $8 billion and $15.25 billion, more than the cost of replacing them with new diesel buses.
And another point that I want to make is that electric buses are only effective for about 100 miles per charge. And it is my understanding that the electric bus, that the effectiveness of it was actually tested down in Florida. And so the roads that they were assessed on are predominantly flat, whereas the landscape in Mayapack is not flat. I will tell you that. So when I moved from New Jersey, it's funny. So I came from New Jersey, and then I moved to Westchester, and now I'm in Putnam County. And when I go back to visit my relatives in New Jersey, I swear the first thing I notice that's really noticeable is that the terrain up here is really hilly, and then down the shore it's really flat. So it's the terrain here is very different from Florida. So I would say that this test that took place does not accurately account for the conditions here. Also, in Florida, the temperature is quite different than here. So, Christine, what would that mean for the electric school buses here?
It would be unworkable right now. The existing electric grid cannot support it. Electric vehicles are showing an inability to operate or charge in frigid temperatures. They are designed to operate best in 70-degree temperatures, and electric vehicles lose up to 40% of their traveling range in extreme cold, and time required to charge them is much longer. I hear from our friends upstate that the routes are too long to make electric buses a viable alternative. One supervisor told me they had to buy diesel generators to get the buses to work in the winter temperatures, and students are sitting in frigid buses with no heat. He also said these buses are heavier than their diesel counterparts and need special tow trucks to handle the extra weight when they get stuck.
So, is there any key people, officials, that you can reach out to try to stop or delay this mandate until we actually are ready for this change?
Assemblyman Phil Palisano introduced and sponsored legislation S8220 A8447 that among the provisions would delay the mandate's implementation until at least 2045 and require additional cost, benefit, and safety analysis studies before it can take effect. Our Western New York colleague, Senator George Borrello, has also introduced similar legislation, S8467, to rescind the mandate and replace it with a state-funded pilot program that allows schools to test out how these buses perform in a range of transportation responsibilities, rather than commit the whole state to it at once.
So can you give an example of how some school districts have handled this state mandate?
One example is St. Lawrence County, where the transportation supervisor, Edward Knox of the Central School District, did the research and worked out how to make these buses work. The district applied for state grants and got one from New York State Education Department for $257,000. It's interesting to note that the Education Department is spending money on buses rather than students. This grant would bring the cost of the electric bus down to what they were paying for a diesel bus, about $180,000. Mind you, the transportation supervisor only supported the change because the mandate was in place. He saw no reason to change from diesel technology, which was tried and true. However, to buy the electric buses, voters would have to approve it. Beforehand, the district explained to as many people as they could possibly get to that the electric bus transition is a state law and not an individual choice made by Edward Knox. But on voting day, all that hard work didn't pay off, and the vote was very close. While the rest of the school budget was approved, voters said no to the electric buses, with 76 yeses and 79 noes. The purchase of discounted electric bus is not an unusual or rare case. Dozens of New York school districts have seen voters reject buying electric buses in the last two budget votes in Rochester, in Syracuse, in Ithaca, and Long Island.
So who's in charge of the state mandate to transition to electric buses?
NYSERDA, the New York State agency, is in charge of electric bus transition. A NYSERDA spokesman told NCPR in a written statement that the agency is paying 75 to 100% of electrification plans and currently working with over 200 districts to make the transition. Additionally, thus far, Governor Hochul has refused to back down on the electric bus mandate, saying that this is a health issue.
So from a safety perspective, I am very concerned, as once again, these buses are relying on lithium batteries, which we have learned can experience thermal runaway giving occupants of a bus little or no time to evacuate in the case of a fire. I believe that this new technology is too new and untested to entrust our children's lives to. I have seen a case when an electric bus actually caught fire in London traffic spontaneously. I fear what would happen if an electric bus was in an accident. What would happen, really? You know?
Are we going to have new drills for students to get out of a bus quickly in case it catches on fire? In addition to all the fire drills we have at school?
Right. They would have to implement some sort of plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm extremely concerned. So I've talked to neighbors of mine, and we've discussed actually, if this is actually implemented, that we'd set up carpooling to transport our children to and from schools ourselves. But could you imagine receiving a message from school saying we're switching to remote learning for the day because it's too cold for the electric bus to run? That's so inconvenient, especially if you're working. How can you actually accommodate that,
I wonder if we will become like Cuba, where mechanics will specialize in keeping old, reliable diesel buses running because of the draconian mandates that New York State has put in place.
Another mandate of concern has to do with trucking. The new Advanced Clean Trucks, ACT Act rule, finalized by the State Department of Environmental Conservation, DEC, requires manufacturers of vehicles greater than 8,500 pounds to sell an increasing number of zero-emission vehicles, ZEVs, in New York State. The regulation complements New York's recently adopted legislation that established a goal for 100% of medium and heavy-duty vehicles offered for sale or lease or sold or leased for registration in the state to be zero emission by 2035. Both New York and California lead the way with mandates, go figure, no surprise there, that now are being picked up on the national level in the last days of the Biden presidency. The mandates are pushing for the switch to electric trucks, a problem because these vehicles cost too much, weigh more, carry less cargo, and have a shorter range than their diesel counterparts. Christine, what is the cost of a new electric truck?
So a new clean diesel long-haul tractor typically costs in the range of $180,000 to $200,000. A comparable battery electric truck cost upward of $480,000. The $300,000 upcharge is cost prohibitive for overwhelming majority of motor carriers. More than 95% of the trucking companies are small businesses operating 10 trucks or fewer.
So what would this mean ultimately for the consumer?
Complying with these mandates will push many carriers out of business, and the few that remain will raise prices because the cost of the new vehicles and the fact that they now have a monopoly. Nationwide, severe price inflation for all goods will be the result. I really have to wonder what the government is thinking. Groceries are already so expensive, and if this mandate is not reversed, who knows how high prices will go. Battery electric trucks, which run to approximately 800 pounds, lithium-ion batteries are far heavier than their clean diesel burning counterparts. Since trucks are subject to strict federal weight limits, mandating battery electric trucks will decrease the payload of each truck, putting more trucks on the road, and increase both traffic and congestion and tailpipe emissions.
Transportation is not the only area being hit with costly mandates from New York State. How you heat your home is also under attack as well. Christine, specifically the mandate of New York Heat Act, Affordable Gas Transition Act comes to mind. Could you tell us about that?
Well, in fact, the Senate Republican Conference has unanimously opposed the energy cost and mandates such as the New York Heat Act and Affordable Gas Transition Act. These policies will raise rates for at least 75% of New Yorkers, eliminating thousands of good-paying union jobs, and slap up to $50,000 in cost on homeowners who may be forced to transition from natural gas to electric heat. So we also just put in a new oil burner that is very efficient, but under the governor's new rules, we would have no choice and have to go with a costly conversion to electric heat. There is no thought on how to handle the added strain on the grid, which electric heat, cars, and trucks would cause. Solar and wind are not efficient enough to handle the load. Thousands of acres of land are being sacrificed to solar, impacting forest, wildlife, and farmland. Battery storage is dangerous and produces nothing while drawing power from the grid for heating and cooling of the batteries. Brownouts will become a common thing in New York.
And you just said that you put in a new oil burner. So I just want to add personally, my house is solely electric. So 1 month during the winter, my electric bill was over $900. And it took me about a few days to recover mentally. I was so upset about it. I really was. I also want to remind our audience that, voting in the right candidate into office really directly impacts your life and the lives of your family. And, we want you, we're endorsing Gina Arena. We'd like you to support her as well. You can go to GinaArenaForSenate.com, where you can look more in depth into what she stands for, her policies, or you can donate if you'd like, or you can also get a lawn sign, and we'll be putting up her website and a picture of Gina. So for our upcoming episodes, we'll be talking to two ladies that are from Long Island, Michelle Ann and Christina Kramer, that have been on the forefront for fighting against offshore wind turbines, EMF cables, and what else would that? BESS
facilities as well. Yeah.
So we want to thank you again for watching our podcast. It's not easy being green. Thank you.